$1.7 billion in American Rescue Plan money from the federal government. And we're here to talk to you about how we hope that we can deploy this money, much of this money, into your region. We're actually trying to get it throughout the state, but we want to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to access that money and try to make strategic investments in your region to help really set you on course to be very successful as we climb our way out of this pandemic that I don't want to take a walk down memory lane on. But we will, I'm going to, in a second, I want to hand it over to Erica, but after Erica has a few minutes to say a few words, I'll hand this over to the folks sitting at the table. They'll all tell you a little bit about the programs that they have to offer within their departments or agencies. Some of it is specific ARPA money, but other areas are funds that might grade well with that money, or other monies that they think that folks in the room might want to hear about. And really, once we get through that, we're going to hurry through that a little bit, because ultimately our goal is to hear from you. We want to hear what you're all thinking about. We want to make sure that we're addressing barriers that you may be feeling in your community to accessing the money. We want to hear about projects that you're thinking about doing, and give you an opportunity. Again, we're here to serve your needs, and we're really happy to be in Rochester. We're happy to be in northern Windsor County this afternoon. We started the morning in Springfield, so it's, again, a beautiful day to be here. But Erica, I want to thank you for being a great partner in hosting us, but I want to give you an opportunity to say a few words.
I'm only going to say a few words because the big draw today are these folks, and it's a great opportunity to have some FaceTime with people you might not normally get a chance to have FaceTime with. I'm Erica Hoffman-Keese. I'm the Executive Director of Green Mountain Economic Development Corporation. We're the regional development corporation that serves this area. Our service area is Orange County and Northern Windsor County. So they were with my southern colleague, Bob Flint, in Springfield this morning at Springfield Regional Development Corporation. And I very nicely asked if they could add a Northern Windsor trip, a stop to their trip. They're supposed to be in Randolph in January, and we got snowed out. So I think that the sun is blessing Rochester today with this beautiful weather. After today, if you don't have all of the information that you want after you walk out of this session, one of the things that regional development corporations do is act as a conduit and a liaison to get access. So we aren't here, you don't have to come to us, you feel free to come to any of these people directly, but if you've lost a number or a name or just have a question about who you should be talking to, our office is there to serve you in that purpose, in that role. So,
great. So a few things before I hand it over. I want to say thank you again. This is a beautiful hall, Pierce Hall, and Leslie, I know you might have had some help, but anyway, thank you for all the amazing goodies back here. If you're all hungry, thirsty, there's some food back here. You're all. Thank you. Over here, thank you. It's excellent. You're all really shining brightly here in this county. It's a really great welcome for us, so thank you. And I wanted to mention that you're going to meet the folks sitting at the table here, but there's a few other folks from the state that are with us today. So to give you a quick chance to say hello, we have somebody from the governor's office, so why don't you let us know.
Hi folks, I'm Tom McMurdo, Assistant State Librarian.
Hi, I'm John Zan from Governor Scott's office, and handle special projects, and have been working with a lot of these folks tracking a lot of different projects throughout the state in regards to our federal funding.
Abby, okay, Abby.
Hi, Abby Sherman, Executive Director for the Vermont Economic Progress Council.
Good afternoon, Brian Sewell, Buildings and General Services, State Energy Program Manager under Commissioner Fitch.
Maurice, do you want to introduce yourself?
Marie Levette-Caduto, one of the watershed planners for the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Great. Are there any legislators in the room? Okay, I didn't know. Okay, I didn't know if somebody had snuck in. So okay. So with that, so Todd, I hate to pick on you first since you don't necessarily have ARPA dollars specifically to talk about, but I'm going to turn it over to Todd from Transportation. So.
Thank you. I'm Todd Eaton. I manage the Vermont Local Roads Program. I'm here to represent V-Trans. And as you heard, V-Trans doesn't have anything specific to ARPA funding, but we are gearing up and looking forward to all of the IIJA funds that are going to be coming down. So in regards to that, I do have some suggestions, some information that might help as far as different programs that might break well with the other programs down the line, or something that might come in the future as far as IIJA. I have a summary called that that we've traditionally called "Show Me the Money," and this is the summary of all of the state projects or state programs to help fund some transportation projects, water quality projects, bike and ped projects, which I'll call your attention to because that just opened up as far as the bike and ped. There's several different ways that you can apply for that through either scoping or design construction. There's also small projects. I also have a summary of a number of federal projects that would that are already in existence that would might help with some of this. And one that I thought might be of interest is this fairly potentially large planning and capital grant that could help with preparing for some of the IIJA, getting some of your ducks in a row, things like that. And one of the things that my program does, if you're not familiar with Vermont Local Roads, we focus on municipalities and as far as anything that has to do with roadway networks. One of the ways that we've been encouraged to try to help support you guys with all of this federal funds coming is to build and training programs that might help you with grant writing and things like that. So that is exactly what we're doing. We just recently rolled out a basic grant writing program. The next one that we'll have is some of the anticipated pitfalls that you might experience or might trip over as far as filling out some of the IIJA federal competitive grants. And so we're trying to get out ahead of that and prepare you guys for that while you sharpen your pencils.
Sure. Hi everyone, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. See a lot of friends in the room, friendly faces. I did live in Rochester for 14 years, so know the area fairly well. Alex Farrell, Deputy Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. We're both here to, one, tell you about a few programs, but two, listen to what is going on, what your needs are, where you're running into any roadblocks, because I'm sure you've heard there's a challenge with housing in Vermont right now, and I think other places, but there's not enough of it, and what we have isn't affordable enough for the folks living here. So this has been a struggle, sort of decades in the making, really, but we do have a number of new funding sources and new programs to try to help provide some incentive for communities and some funding for builders and developers. I'm going to just mention a couple of the programs, some of the lower barrier ones that are easier to access, sort of on the smaller scale, one apartment, one house sort of scale. And one of the larger ones has been the Vermont Housing Improvement Program. It's been around just a couple years, and it's a up to $50,000 grant per unit. It's bringing back online and serving affordable housing, renting at affordable rates. It can be to build an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, where you're adding on a separate apartment onto an existing single-family home. It can be adding an apartment. It can be renovating a property. It doesn't have to be housing in the past, but converting it to housing. Something that's in existence that you need some repair money to bring it up to code, weatherize it, and that's a up to $50,000 grant with a 20% match for the property owner per unit, with conditions to serve folks in need of affordable housing. And that program is, I think we're already up to about 550 units that have been created with that program statewide. It's accessed through the regional housing groups, the homeownership centers. So this region kind of touches a number of them, but you're in Windsor County, so it's the Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust is the entity that serves the two counties, and they are the ones that directly work with the property owners, the landlords, to help them through the process, help them meet the conditions. And a good thing about this program is there's ongoing funding, there's rolling commissions, there's no due date. It's sort of apply if you think you have an opportunity to provide more housing in your community. Another one is brand new. It's a Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program. MERS is the acronym, and it provides small grants to folks that live in manufactured housing, so mobile home parks. There's a lot of folks of lower income that are living in homes that are in really tough shape. And this is a grant program up to $15,000. Most of these grants are $5,000 and under to do immediate repairs, or fix windows, leaky roofs, things like that. Repair doors, front steps. This program launched in February, and the first good news I heard about it was we were able to approve. There were 2 elderly households, very low income, that had lost their heat entirely. This program was able to approve the funding to replace their whole heating system within 4 hours, the same day. So really quick results on this. I have a sheet up here that has all the links and program descriptions that you can take. So those are 2 lower barrier programs that I think folks should be aware of. Under that mobile home improvement program, there's also funding for lot repairs. Some of these mobile home parks have vacant and abandoned homes on them, lots that are in disrepair. There needs to be a foundation put down, or new electrical brought, or cleaned up. There's also grants to the park owner to do that, to make these more healthy, safe living environments, as well as homeowner grants for the foundations. If you place a new manufactured home on a foundation, it's going to age better, it's going to appreciate, it's not going to have the same problems that older mobile homes used to heave and create problems. The new manufactured housing is energy efficient, it's Energy Star, and lower utility bills. So really trying to provide some access to folks that live in that type of housing, need that type of housing. It's an affordable way for someone to become a homeowner in Vermont. Some of our other programs are much larger multifamily, I think 30 units plus sort of properties, and they are with our partners like the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board or the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. They're listed on here. They have some long-standing programs and then hundreds of millions of dollars added to them with ARPA money to help support new housing development. Much of that housing also dedicated to those exiting homelessness, trying to help folks secure permanent safe housing as well as recovery housing, folks going through those struggles. So there's lots of new sources out there. Some of this can be pretty complicated and daunting. So seek us out, ask questions if you know anyone that is trying to build housing. You think there's opportunities in the town or in the region. The last thing I'll leave you with is really for all this money to be put to best use and to see sort of more housing being built across the state to serve our residents, it really starts a lot with planning. Back to your community, planning for housing growth, adopting zoning and bylaws that are pro-housing growth in the right locations, seeking certain designations to allow some of the regulatory barriers to be lessened, also incentives into those smart growth areas. So we have designation programs, and there's a link on here for that really help communities plan for the housing that they need, they want. You've got to do some legwork up front to make it more affordable for your home builders, your developers. Because right now we're in a situation in Vermont where there's lots of funding to sort of help folks at the lowest income levels subsidize housing to be built. And then there's a market rate housing that folks that are wealthier can afford and find a house for themselves, have something built. But sort of in that middle, there really is a broken market right now. It costs more to build a home that should sell for $300,000. You can't build it for that. It's going to cost $400,000 or $500,000, but really the population needs homes that are more of the $300,000 range, and that even seems high from when I bought a house in Rochester 15 years ago. But that workforce, middle income, missing middle income sort of bracket that is really above the affordable, where the programs to support affordable housing end, and where people can't yet compete in the market because the market is so overpriced because there's such a scarcity of housing, so it's driven up costs. So there's some new programs, hopefully we'll get passed in this year's budget to incentivize that type of building as well. So please reach out to Alex or I. Will be here, talk to you about housing, talk to people about housing all the time, and if you're involved or you know someone that's trying to build housing, thank them. We often try to look at developers as a bad word in Vermont. I'll tell you, people trying to build housing, they need support and assistance, and they need incentives to actually pull it off to serve the population and the type of housing our communities need. So, thank you.
I'm Brett Long. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development, and we're actually a sister department with Josh's group underneath Secretary Curley's Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And our job is really to try to improve the lives of Vermonters by listening to, supporting, and advocating for businesses, trying to develop a business community across Vermont. And before we got started, a couple of folks mentioned to me some of the issues that you're confronting here in Rochester. Potentially losing your market, having a high school close. And I probably should start off, and I will start off by saying a lot of what we do is facilitation. We hear about those kinds of issues in small towns across the state. You know, we've seen situations, there was a situation fairly recently in the northern part of the state where a group came together and bought out a market that was going to be closed and turned it into a co-op. A heavy lift, a lot of work, somebody's got to spearhead it. I certainly understand those issues, but there are alternatives, and I encourage you to reach out to us or Josh's group to see what we can do to help facilitate. We're actually involved in a project right now in southern Vermont where they're trying to reuse an existing high school. That high school has actually been vacant for 10 or 15 years, a long time. So the message there is reach out if you think that there's something we can do to help with the issues that are confronting you. We're specifically here today to talk about ARPA federal funding opportunities. And through COVID, our department has, I think it's now 4 or 5 different assistance programs that we have administered. We've currently got one running right now. It's called the Community Recovery and Reinvestment Program, or CRRP. It's a very large program for us and for the state. It's $40 million. We have awarded about a quarter of the money. We're in the midst of trying to get approval to award another, roughly a quarter of that money. So in the next week or two, we expect to have about half of the money awarded. But we're still accepting applications. There are 4 or 5, depending on how you count, different tracks for financing in that program. One is trying to support the development of child care facilities. Another is trying to develop affordable housing. And to try to differentiate between what we're doing and what Josh's group does, we're trying to reach out to affordable housing developers who don't have access to some of the larger, more well-established sources of financing. So they tend to be smaller projects in more remote locations. So lots of information about the affordable housing track on our website. We also have a track to try to support the development of businesses, specifically in qualified census tracts. I don't know if there are any qualified census tracts specifically in Rochester, but we could certainly communicate about it. And then there's also a track for developing water and wastewater projects when those projects are tied to affordable housing or a business expansion. So several different tracks, and what we're trying to do there is focus on things that were most directly impacted by COVID. Childcare was very heavily impacted by COVID. And we have the residual need for people to be able to get childcare to be able to go back to work. So I'd say it's a $40 million program, and awards can be up to $1 million or 20% of the project cost. So the idea is we're really trying to find projects where they've been percolating for a while. There's a lot of work been done already, but we can provide the funding or the financing to be able to get it over the goal line and get people started on the project. The next thing I wanted to talk about is our department acts as essentially the marketing arm of a federal agency called the Northern Borders Regional Commission, NBRC, who also has just kicked off their annual program. And this is a program that's available in the 4 northern tier states of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. In Vermont, it's available across the state. In the other states, it's only in certain counties. And it's a program that Senator Leahy has pushed very hard during his tenure, and this year the amounts have been increased to $11 million. So a substantial program. It's targeted at infrastructure specifically, things like transportation infrastructure, basic public infrastructure, telecommunications, renewable energy, business and workforce development, healthcare, tourism, recreation, but it's not specifically available to businesses, it's available to nonprofits and municipalities. So a lot of what we see is where a municipality is the applicant for funding to support some kind of a need in those other areas, oftentimes supporting a business expansion or development. I don't know if I need to say a lot more about it than that, except that it's a two-step process. The first step, it involves submitting a letter of interest that describes the project, gets into only a little bit of detail. Those will be evaluated, and then if it's a priority project, that project will be invited to submit a full application. The other thing I wanted to mention is we administer a number of other programs, but one in particular that's, I think, particularly relevant, especially in talking about the closure of your high school, is a brownfield redevelopment or remediation program.
We're enrolled.
Great. Yeah, for the high school specifically? Excellent. But our department can make funds available through the agency in connection with the Agency of Natural Resources to try to help clean up, remediate brownfield situations. You know, the reason our department's involved is it's specific to try to foster economic development. That's my program. Thanks.
Is it easier to see me if I stand?
Yes.
All right. In full flat mirror, you can see all your faces. Hi, I'm Stephanie Smith. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Home Emergency Management. And who remembers Tropical Storm Area? Who's living in this area? Okay. So the funding that I manage is predominantly around reducing future impacts from flooding. So prior to ARPA, that was on the FEMA side, managing FEMA funding. So there's two big programs there that I'll tell you a little bit about. One is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's funding that follows disasters in the state. So following Irene, we had $32 million in our program to spend anywhere in the state to reduce future impacts. It doesn't have to be tied to whatever the disaster was. But when we have disaster funding in the state, we get a cut of that to reduce our future risks and to look forward and see what we can do to prevent the next one. We can't prevent the storm, but we can prevent the impacts. So that's one program. The other big program on the FEMA side that I wanted to mention is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. So that's FEMA's annual funding program that's across the country, but there's a specific set aside for each state that we can apply for to do some of that flood reduction risk reduction. So that's the FEMA side. Following Irene, it became really clear that we couldn't in Vermont meet the full need of flood reduction, that we were doing all the types of projects that we wanted to do with just that FEMA funding. There's specific requirements that don't necessarily equate to the landscape that we have in Vermont. So for a few years now, there's been interest in having a state program. When ARPA became available, we were able to create that program. So our state program is the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. So we're in the second year of funding for that program. We have just under $9 million left to spend, and I'm hoping to have most of that obligated by the end of the summer. So trying to move things pretty quickly, but helping reduce future risk to flooding events. So the types of projects, and I mentioned the three different programs. You guys don't need to know which program makes the most sense. I don't expect you to. You don't need to know the various deadlines. But reach out to us. I also, in the back of the room here, have Lisa Kolb and Steve Libby, who are both on my team, and we'd be more than happy to help walk you through this from the first step to the end. So in terms of the types of projects that we can do across all of the funding, we can start at a simple, we don't know what to do, but we know we have a problem scale, so looking at a scoping study. We've done a few village-wide studies where we're looking at what are different areas where the river is constricted, what types of projects are going to have the best impact for reducing your flood risk, so that we can help you prioritize that risk and decrease it in an efficient way. We can look at specific structures like culverts or bridges, and that might need to be upsized, helping with design or funding for those upsizing projects. We can do large floodplain restoration projects, so we've done a few of those across the state that we're removing fill, allowing the river to access its floodplain in a flood event so that it's not impacting our communities. And we can do property buyouts. So if there's a property that's pretty heavily impacted or has risk to become pretty heavily impacted, we can purchase those properties and make sure that they stay in green open space in perpetuity. So if the river needs that space, it can access it. There's not a house in the way to be flooded. And we can do vacant parcel conservation as well. So if there's a site that's developable, but at the town level, you're recognizing there really shouldn't be anything there because the river accesses that site once in a while, we can help you conserve that as well. So those are our programs, but I encourage you to reach out and let us know what we can do to help you reduce your flood risk.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Delnau. I'm the state librarian, and I'm here to tell you about two capital project funding opportunities that the Department of Libraries is going to be administering. The first of them is through the U.S. Treasury, and it's specifically ARPA funding. So if you remember, think back to the beginning of the COVID pandemic, do you remember if your library closed? Raise your hand if your library closed. Quite a lot of folks here in Vermont had libraries closed during the pandemic, largely because the facilities were older and they weren't set up really well for social distancing, because here in the state we actually saw libraries open and then they had to close again when it got cold and they couldn't have circulating air to meet the requirements from the health department or the local health officials. So we learned that our libraries have some facilities issues that actually prevented them from serving as that center that you all needed in your community. Not just to get books, which you think about a lot with the library, but you also go to the library to use the internet, right? So while some people in the community, you were able to work from home, you were able to go to school from home, your kids could go to school from home, you could go to the doctors from home. Community members who don't have the internet in their homes or who don't have a device to use the internet in their homes, people who don't yet have high-speed broadband, when they would try to go to a meeting during the pandemic with the library closed, did that work out very well for them? No, not at all. So this funding is really geared toward a specific ARPA response, and the U.S. Treasury has funding that is really carved out for public libraries and other facilities where people are able to access the internet for the purposes of work, education, and telehealth. So the state of Vermont has applied to use $16.4 million of those U.S. Treasury funds to support public libraries in our state in ensuring that they have facilities that are really able to continuously provide service to you. So some of the things that might qualify would be if a library has a significant issue with the building that would potentially prevent it from opening. So we envision that this could be something like an HVAC replacement, that it could be an ADA access issue where some people actually still, just on a normal day, forget about COVID, but they really can't get into the building because there may be steps and they need a ramp. It could be something where there's a gaping hole in your roof, and sadly we do at the Department of Libraries hear about libraries in the state that have a hole in the roof or a hole in the floor or a staircase that's not working. So we're still waiting for approval from Treasury, and we're still going back and forth about exactly what this program will look like, but those are the types of projects that might qualify for that $16.4 million. You might have heard, we have a lot of libraries in our state. We know of at least 185 of them. I think there are more hiding out there. So we know that the need for improvements to these buildings, many of which are over 80 years old, over 100 years old, that there's a significant need for funding that a lot of towns, especially small and rural communities, haven't had the money to set aside locally in their municipality to support their municipal public library or their incorporated public library. It's about half and half. So the department was encouraged by Senator Leahy's office to apply for congressionally directed spending. So we did that, and we were really excited in December to find out that we will be receiving $10 million in congressionally directed spending to support public libraries in Vermont. It could be a municipal public library or an incorporated public library. Both are eligible for these funds to make capital project improvements that are going to help the community to kind of bolster their resources to ensure that their library continues to be able to function, that the building, that any repairs that are needed can be done, and that the building can be maintained by the community. So the department plans, we have a total of $26.4 million that we are going to be administering. It's exciting for us at the Department of Libraries because that's a really great opportunity for libraries. We'd like to distribute the funds throughout the state. Right now, we are conducting something that is called a needs assessment. So if you talk to your local librarian, they know that they have an extension until the end of the day on the 15th to submit their needs assessment. That survey and the results of it are going to help the department to build out the grant program for both of these upcoming grant opportunities. We'll do one grant application, and like our colleague, we don't want you to have to figure out which grant you qualify for. Let us figure that out. We'll have one grant application that we will score, and we'll figure out which projects different communities qualify for. And these will be competitive grants. We anticipate that there's a lot of need, but we really want to be sure that we distribute the funds equitably around the state, and it's really important for us to be serving specifically our small rural communities with that congressionally directed spending money through HUD. So look for more information soon. The department will be doing webinars, and we've got 2 flyers up here that you can read about each of the different programs. You can also go to the Department of Libraries website. There's a little spotlight image, and you can go straight to the capital projects page from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I see some faces that I remember. So after 2013, I worked for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. We do the accelerated fast forward in Rochester on 73. So I've worked with this community before. You're an amazing community to work with. My name is Jennifer Fitch. So today I'm the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. At the time, I was one of the project managers for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. But a great community to work with, and it's great to see some faces that look familiar today. The Department of Buildings and General Services primarily serves internal customers, so we're internal to state government, but we have a couple of external programs. One is all of our information and welcome centers. We manage all of those. In addition to that, we have an energy office. And in the last couple of years, we've been trying really hard to take our internal program and make it external for municipalities. So basically, we started this program in 2012, 2013. The goal of the program is to make state buildings more energy efficient. And by doing that, we're also reducing our operational costs while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's really a win-win. And we're really excited. Last year, we were selected for a $45 million program to make municipal buildings more energy efficient and resilient. So this program is just for you, which is pretty awesome. So how many people here today represent a municipality? Okay, we got a couple of hands. And then there was one person, but how many people here today are from a regional planning commission? Okay, so all eyes on this gentleman over here, and afterwards all race to him. This program basically has 4 components, and so the first component is the regional planning commissions are receiving $2.4 million to help expand capacity and provide direct services to all of their municipal towns. What that means is they have been hired basically to do training, outreach, help with grant application assistance, and also technical assistance. So really their job is to walk you through this program. So if you think about it, BGS Group oversees the whole program, then the RPCs are helping administer the program, and then they're working directly with the town. So it's kind of the triangle that we've set up. And so those grants have already gone out, and so the next step, which we're in now, also very exciting, is we have up to $4,000 mini grants. They're very easy to apply for, the barrier is really, really low, and what those $4,000 grants are for is to either build an energy committee within your town, or maybe have gatherings within your town to talk more about energy efficiency and resilience and what that means to you in terms of town operations or even your own home. Or it may be also used for planning. So you can hire a consultant to come and help identify candidate buildings for you, help you start filling out applications, and then there's some other things that we're going to be doing within buildings as well that they can help administer. So that opened up about a month ago. We're accepting applications on a rolling basis. Again, the barrier is super low for those, and there's no match requirements, so really easy to get those money. The next step, and this one's really important if you want to leverage the funding that's coming, is building assessments. So the goal here is that every community has to do a building assessment on a building that they may want to actually invest dollars into. So they're called level 1 or level 2 assessments. Level 1 is like a walk-around assessment. So that means someone's going to come. We have consultants that are working for BGS. We're going to deploy them through the RPCs so we can deploy them efficiently, and they're going to come around. The level 1 is a walk around, so they literally walk around your building, they look at your windows. I noticed over here on both sides you have some insulation here. They're going to look at things like that. They're going to look at what your heating source is. They're going to look at how weatherized your building is. They're going to do those sorts of things when they come around. A level 2 is the same thing as a level 1, but it's more intensive. So they're also going to do a blower door test, which really shows you where your building is leaky, so where it's best to put insulation. And they'll do thermal imaging as well to try to look for those cool spots along the wall, for example. So it's more labor intensive, but it gives you more information about your building. So if you have energy bills for the last several years, if you have some building plans, I would definitely recommend doing the level 2. But again, happy to do the level 1, and either one will access you the money. So the 4th step is an up to $500,000 grant to make your buildings more municipally energy efficient and resilient. Again, no match requirements. We're trying to keep those barriers down really low. Again, and the goal is we want to help you weatherize, we want to help you fuel switch to more renewable heating sources, and really what we also want to do is lower down those greenhouse gas emissions, right? But we also want to make your buildings more efficient, and by doing so, it will be cheaper to heat your building, for example. So your cost to operate your building should go down as a result of this program. So again, it's really a big win-win all around. So the assessment application should be coming out shortly, hopefully in the next 4 weeks or so. Again, many grants are already out, and we're hoping to do the up to $500,000 implementation grants starting this fall. So we're really excited about that. And I just want to mention too that we have a lot of partners. So we mentioned the regional planning commissions. We also have Efficiency Vermont, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. So Katie Buckley, love her, she's amazing. And she's been doing a lot to support our program. And she's going to be putting out some information pretty soon about matching funds. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the last group is the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network. So again, we have a lot of partners that are helping us get this program off the ground. The last thing that I want to mention that's really important, and thank you to Deputy Secretary Farnham, we'll be talking here in a little bit. This program actually got selected for revenue replacement. So originally it was ARPA funds, very restrictive in terms of what we could do with it, couldn't meet the intent of the bill. But it was selected for revenue loss replacement, which means now it acts like state dollars, not federal dollars. And what that does for your community is it allows you to take those dollars and to match them with other federal funding opportunities. So by leveraging this program, you're going to be able to unlock federal dollars. So a great example of that is my partner here at Libraries. So you could take our money and you could take her money and invest it into a library, because mine acts like state and hers acts like federal dollars. So lots of opportunities for stacking, we call it stacking. And again, Katie Buckley is going to be putting out some information to municipalities about how all of that stacking works and those stacking opportunities. But we're really excited to bring this program to you, so hopefully we get some folks that have we had interest so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, that's great. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Good afternoon, Nancy Tebbets with Vermont Agency Agriculture, Food and Markets. A couple of things I'd like to talk about. One program that's just recently launched is something called the Farm and Food Workers Relief Program. And this is for farm workers. Maybe they were working in produce, maybe they were milking cows, maybe they were in the slaughterhouse. There is a one-time $600 payment that could go to those workers that began at the start of the pandemic. If you recall, back in the pandemic, a lot of places were not allowed and did not shut down because they were responsible for feeding us and keeping us fed. So that program is available. It's a regional program. It's being run, there's an application online. It's a pretty simple application. It's run by something called PASA out of Pennsylvania, P-A-S-A. If you Google that, there's an online portal which you can apply there for that one-time $600 payment for those working in agriculture, whether it be produce, milking cows, or in the slaughterhouses. I would encourage people to apply early for that. It's there's no deadline on enrolling in it, but when the money goes out, the money's done. So the earlier you get your application on that, the better. A couple of other programs to think about, something called Working Lands. Think about someone who earns their living working off the land, whether that's in the woods or on the farm. We have a granting program. Could be someone that has a business where they're turning wood into a value-added product. It could be someone that's got firewood. They may need some infrastructure improvement with that. That can extend to the farming, agriculture community as well. Maybe it's a cheesemaker. Maybe it's someone that's working in produce that needs that critical storage capacity. Maybe they need a freezer. That is a granting program that we run through the Agency of Agriculture. Another one specific just to dairy, something called the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. We received some USDA funds, and this is thinking about some new approaches and also building some of the infrastructure that we already have in Vermont that improves that infrastructure. So think of cheesemakers, thinking that maybe someone that maybe wants to transition to another practice on the farm. Maybe they want to implement more grazing practices. Maybe they want to improve what's in the milk house. We have grants for that, but also on the processing side, if someone is a cheesemaker and they want to improve their capacity there, that program is run through the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. Those are a couple of programs. We're also trying to get a few more things through the legislature that would help the infrastructure for agriculture, because we're all aimed at trying to feed more of us locally. Because of the pandemic, we realized that the system kind of broke down. It was a national system. We need more of a regional approach to what we do, but we really need to get more of our capacity with infrastructure, storage, distribution, freezers, all of that, because we can grow and produce a tremendous amount of food in Vermont, but we need that network. So we're trying to get a few programs through the legislature that would focus on 3 areas particularly. One is meat, one is maple, and one is produce. Those areas that have been historically maybe underserved or have not received programs in the past. So we're trying to get a program, a granting program through their legislature, and the only reason we're able to do that is because of the pandemic. The programs, we've got some more robust funding that's come through, and we think that, as our theme has always been, long-term projects are going to help us down the road in those areas with agriculture to feed more of us here, but also New Hampshire, Connecticut, New York, and in the East. Around for any questions after this, and I think we're going to go to Julie now, right? We always close out with Doug.
Good afternoon. I'm Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources, and was going to talk about a few opportunities related to water infrastructure funding that's currently available through the agency, as well as some additional opportunities beyond what Commissioner Fitch described related to climate action. So the Agency of Natural Resources has received nearly $300 million of ARPA funding to invest in water infrastructure projects. There are a number of different initiatives. I'm going to touch on 3 that I feel like are probably most germane to this part of the state. 2 of them fall under what we call our Healthy Homes program. The first provides direct beneficiary payments to low-income Vermonters who have failed or failing wells and septic systems to replace those systems. It's got a sliding scale of payment up to the full cost of replacement for Vermonters making less than 80% of median household income. We have had 2 rounds of applications so far and received more than 2,000 applications from Vermonters with failed or failing systems. We anticipate running another round towards the end of this calendar year. Individuals have to apply, and so anything you can do to get word out to your neighbors that this program exists and encourage them to enroll if they find themselves in that condition would be great. A related program under that Healthy Homes banner is focused on manufactured housing communities and have been providing grants to work on drinking water systems, wastewater systems, and drainage systems in MHCs. We know that generally the infrastructure in these communities can be challenging, and that oftentimes investing in the infrastructure results in a rate increase that residents can't really afford. The beauty of these ARPA funds is we're able to provide a higher level of loan forgiveness or cost share than we've ever been able to provide with the traditional programs administered by the Agency of Natural Resources. We've done an initial round of funding, received applications from 56 MHCs statewide, including 6 in Windsor County. A lot of the initial work is doing assessments of the condition of the infrastructure. We anticipate another funding round this summer where we will actually put out more money for implementation to help support the construction of those drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater improvement projects.
So again, if you are aware of manufactured housing communities in your municipality, encourage you to pick up one of these handouts. We have an email list for each of the different program initiatives, and if folks sign up, they'll get pinged every time there is a new funding opportunity. The third funding opportunity I wanted to flag is what we're calling our pre-treatment initiative. As a wastewater engineer, this is one that brings particular joy to my heart. But what it is oftentimes, particularly breweries, distilleries, meat processing, dairy processing manufacturers produce a really high-strength wastewater. It has a lot of sort of spent product in it, which is challenging for municipal wastewater facilities or on-site septic systems to be able to handle effectively. The pre-treatment program provides grants to those businesses to actually install the necessary practices to knock down the strength of that wastewater. Our hope is that helps these businesses grow in place, and as Anson had indicated in his remarks, we know that some of those producers were particularly hard hit by the pandemic, so it's sort of a double win. We've done an initial round of grants. Most of them went to breweries, and we anticipate announcing additional pre-treatment program funding later this summer. So again, if you're aware of a local business that you think might be interested in this program, please have them sign up for our listserv. In addition to the water infrastructure investments, the state of Vermont's investing about $250 million of its ARPA funds in climate action initiatives. The biggest chunk of that is going into weatherization programs. For low-income Vermonters, those programs are being administered through the Office of Economic Opportunity at the Department of Children and Families as part of our low-income weatherization assistance program. But for moderate-income Vermonters, there are expanded opportunities through Efficiency Vermont. So it's a great time if you know of people considering weatherization projects to look at those two different funders and see if there might be funding available to support a weatherization project. Coupled with that is money to help do electric service panel upgrades. We know that many of Vermont's older homes aren't ready to plug in an electric vehicle or to support a heat pump. That you need to often go from 100 amp service to 200 amp service, and there are grants available right now through the Department of Public Service. Commissioner Tierney isn't able to be here this afternoon, but to help support homeowners in making those upgrades to their electrical service. So that's just a little, or a high-level overview, and would only end before I kick it over to Doug with a plug for the fact that in addition to these federal ARPA funds, the Agency of Natural Resources is slated to receive an additional about $350 million in water infrastructure funding. This is as much money as my agency has seen over the next 5 years as we saw in the previous 50. So it's really unprecedented, the level of funding we have available for drinking water and wastewater projects. If you have a community that needs to make an investment in their system, the time is now. I know that the League of Cities and Towns, Katie Buckley, has done a lot of work encouraging communities to look at their ARPA funds as an opportunity to match some of these state dollars. And just want to let you know that there really is an unprecedented amount of funding available to support that foundational infrastructure. So I'll turn it over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Julie. So Douglas Farnham, Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Administration. And it's kind of fun for me because in AOA, we don't usually interact with the public. Most of my job and the job of the Deputy Secretary pre-pandemic is focused on budgeting and contracts and grants, and no one wants to talk about that. So before I get into my AOA style speech, one consequence of Commissioner Tierney not being able to be here, she didn't get a chance to talk about the broadband investments that have been part of the ARPA deployment. And Julie just talked about a lot of money in water. The other area where there's a lot of money is in broadband. And I think it's not even a 0 to 60, type situation. It's more like a 0 to 200. So prior to the pandemic, Vermont just didn't have a lot of funds available after assessing all of our other needs to invest a lot in broadband. So $1 million, $2 million, those were the types of conversations that were being had pre-pandemic. Right now, there is essentially $245 million of federal spending that's being deployed by the Vermont Community Broadband Board. And they're doing that through the communication union districts. It covers, I think, somewhere around 220 out of Vermont's 246 or 247, I forget what the number just changed to recently, towns. But it's like 90% of the towns are in a communication district. There's another method for towns that aren't in a communication district. But those CUDs, as they're called, cover most of it. And the money is being distributed through that mechanism. It also has a very strong methodology we have good data on which addresses, which areas are underserved from a broadband perspective. So it is going out to the areas that need it the most. And then now there's another federal program where another $100 million is coming down. So I urge everyone to be aware of and to participate and to kind of keep an eye on what is happening with the CUDs, but there is a structure in place. It is moving forward. Over $100 million of that has already been committed to projects, and over $37 million of it has already been spent. But that is going to be a massive change in Vermont and the access to broadband that our communities have over the next 5 years. Most of that money, most of that $245 million of it, needs to be spent by the end of 2026. So in the next 3.5 years, there's going to be a pretty dramatic shift in accessibility of broadband. And I think we're just starting to see signs of that in some communities. We're starting to see some of those projects happening. But at this point, none of the projects have actually been finished. So it is really ramping up right now. And I think that access to broadband is an enabler for, higher levels of either working remotely instead of having to drive in every day, having more business starting out in smaller communities. I do think that broadband is going to help with the economic development in our region. And then, of course, there's at least another $100 million. We haven't heard back from the feds on if we're getting an additional amount above that $100 million. But that will be a little bit longer timeline. And so the next 5 years are going to be really a massive amount of progress in that front. And then combined with the weatherization efforts, the grid modernization efforts, I think Public Service Department certainly it's a busy time. So now shifting more into my AOA kind of general remarks. Just like Secretary Curley, I have no desire to revisit the pandemic. But for context, Vermont received $1.25 billion of coronavirus relief fund early on in the pandemic. A lot of that and the time frame to spend it was incredibly short. AOA stepped in as a central administrator for that money. All the programs were built in all the different departments and agencies, and the Agency of Administration oversaw the program development, made sure we were within the federal rules, and kind of coordinated the portfolio of spending. The decisions on what to spend on were made by the legislature, but that $1.25 billion, it was spent very well, but it was spent on short-term needs, on helping the healthcare system get through the pandemic, on economic support to reduce the amount of businesses that close. And I would say, as a former tax economist, if you look at how the Vermont economy has weathered the pandemic, we actually made it through the pandemic much better than a lot of other states, because we did put resources into helping businesses survive that tough time. We did spend our money quickly, much more quickly than most other states. So that was reactive money, and it was spent very well, it was spent very quickly. 1.15 billion of that 1.25 was spent before the end of 2020. So we were ready to, essentially when it was originally set to expire, we pretty much had that all spent and we had known uses for all of it. The 1-year extension that helped out a lot of states didn't really change things for us that much. It actually shifted small amounts of funding around for us, but Vermont really got through that and spent that money fast. Then the ARPA state fiscal recovery came. That was $1.05 billion of very broad discretionary money and $113 million of capital investment money that had to be tied to broadband. When I talked about that broadband earlier, that's where that $113 million came in. I'm trying to talk about the numbers for the scope here. The $1.05 billion, again, it was appropriated by the legislature, worked with the governor on spending it in buckets, really, and I think that recovery money was spent by Vermont as it was intended to be, in infrastructure in economic recovery efforts that really help Vermont get set up to be in a better position if there's a future pandemic. And I think that the heavy investments in the water sector make a lot of sense, because the more time I spend in state government, the more I realize that investments in a community's water system are one of the main things that are holding our communities back from growing smartly and from more businesses getting set up. I was just talking to a business owner in Chester who was basically saying, well, it's lucky our business is this way because the town was concerned when we came in and didn't know if there would be capacity on the water system if we were doing business in this kind of way. It happened to work out, but that also tells me that Chester is kind of redlined on the capacity in their system. And I think a lot of Vermont communities are in that position where we haven't necessarily had the extra funds to upgrade and to prepare capacity for growth. And that's what a lot of these ARPA funds are doing, is trying to set the stage for long-term growth in Vermont, and then allowing the communities to pick their path of, this is how we want to grow. This money we're talking about, the hundreds of millions of dollars, the billions of dollars, we usually fight over between $5 and $30 million a year in new initiatives in state government. It's that the annual conversation pre-pandemic was down in that range, 5 to 30 million in most budget years of new stuff. This is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for towns, and I do think if your community is going to grow in the next 20 years, it has to be enabled now. It has to be planned now, because at the federal level, I don't think that we're going to see this again, not in my professional lifetime. I think the long-term impacts of the level of spending at the federal level that came out, the political situation at the national level, we're not likely to see more funding coming out, especially with the level of discretion and kind of the flexibility that was provided states was highly unusual as well. So the door isn't closed. On ARPA, we are right at about half of the money. About $500 million is right around there is obligated. And so there is still opportunity to get in there. But then even after the ARPA programs are getting farther along, we have the bipartisan infrastructure law programs. Julie referenced some of those for Agency of Natural Resources. The Agency of Transportation is also getting a great deal of funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law in more traditional areas, but dramatically increased levels of funding, which will provide more opportunity for more towns to participate in those programs. And then the Inflation Reduction Act also was passed, and those programs haven't rolled out yet at the federal level. Inflation Reduction Act programs are strange. They're different. They're not this state model where the state was given money and then discretion. They're not the bipartisan infrastructure law where more money was pumped into the existing channels of formula grants and competitive programs that already existed. A lot of new programs, a lot of new tax credits, a lot of different vehicles were created in the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity in that program over the next couple of years. It's going to become more clear what that is, but it's also going to be different, and it's going to be new. So I do think that's one area I would encourage communities to keep an eye out for, especially for communities that are interested in climate change, because from a policy perspective, climate programs were the major component of the Inflation Reduction Act. Even though it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, it was actually, I think from a policy perspective, more focused at some of those green programs and promoting energy efficiency. So very important 5 years. And then the last thing I would talk about is during the session, the administration proposed $3 million of general funds, so of state money, for municipal technical assistance that could be prioritized to communities that based on a number of metrics, appear to are much more likely to need technical assistance. In general, smaller communities are less likely to have the tax base, to have the budget to fund economic development or planning staff, right? And that's fine most of the time, right? Smaller communities may have long stretches where they don't necessarily need to make any big changes, so keeping someone on staff wouldn't always make sense. So that $3 million is prioritized for those smaller communities. For instance, Rochester is pretty high on that list, just outside the pre-qualified range, but we do, in consulting with the regional planning commissions who are going to play a huge role in that program, we don't believe the full $3 million is going to be taken up by pre-qualified towns. And starting in May, we're going to have a mechanism for towns to come in the door and propose and request assistance that aren't pre-qualified. And then we'll assess those as a group. And I think with Rochester being close to the pre-qualified level, you know, we would request for assistance from Rochester would certainly be taken extremely seriously. One thing we're trying to encourage there is, of course, working with Regional Planning Commission, but also proposals that set up shared staff or shared capabilities with other smaller communities in the area. Those are heavily favored, right? Because sometimes it may not make sense for one town to have a full-time resource, but if they share, if 3 or 4 towns that are smaller share a resource, then they can support that resource long-term and it's more affordable. So that program is going to move very fast. The opportunity to start putting in requests will start in May, and we do anticipate that that $3 million should be spoken for by the end of the calendar year. Because what we're really trying to do is make sure that smaller communities, communities that need the technical assistance help, have additional support so that they can put in applications to be considered. Because we have to have all of the ARPA money obligated by the end of next year. So by 12/31/2024, it has to be obligated. And so we can't take our foot off the gas in our programs. So what we're trying to do is help provide additional support to some communities to make sure that we're at least seeing all the projects. And then we have to have spent the money, of course, by the end of 2026. So we're definitely in a move very fast situation, but we do want to get more options in. And one thing I was remiss in forgetting, one reason we're out here today talking to you is actually my work with John Zanin over there. He helped us look at projects and try to identify, you know, which parts of the state we're not hitting as much. We want to make sure the ARPA money is going out equitably and helping to improve everywhere in the state, not just the very geographically densely populated areas. So I think one thing that spurred this tour, this kind of conversation is we want the programs to hit more towns. We want to get more applications. And the only way to do that is to go out and talk to people. So thank you all for coming here today. And sorry if I took up a bit too much time. We have some question time.
No, we're good. We're in good shape here. So thank you. So with that, this is when we want to turn it over to all of you and hear from you. So is there anybody that would like to volunteer to go first? And what I would just ask is if you would state your name and ask your question so everybody can hear the question, and we'll try to dole it out to the right person. There's got to be somebody that's got a burning question.
I have a question. So I'm part of the repurposing of the high school project. We've been at this since 2020, February 2020, and we are now starting the phase 2 of the ARPA, and we were able to work with Vermont Community Development Board to get a feasibility study, and with the balance of that, those planning grants, we're doing other things. We are incredibly grateful for our regional planning committee, and we've been greatly supported, especially by Sarah Wright. So, but the property is currently owned by the school district, and once we get the results of the environmental assessment process, which we are still going, the town will hold an acquisition vote. Act 46 basically said the town can acquire for $1, but the voters, of course, want to be fully informed. So we are working very closely with the school district right now. And one of the questions I have is there any kind of funding where in a situation like this, where the prospective property owner, which would be the town, depending on that vote, and the current property owner, which is the school district, and I do believe the school district is also considered a municipality, is there any way that we can work in partnership to actually qualify for some of these grants? I mean, so far we've been doing well as the prospective buyer, but for some of these grants, do we have to already own the property? Because I understand that there is very much deadlines for when these grants need to be submitted. And so we're in that sort of precarious state where the voters want all the information. We're working with kind of a little bit scarce availability of some some of the consultants that are necessary to move this process. So it's very hard to know a date by which everything is going to be completed. And yet we want to be able to take advantage of this funding because the feasibility study put a pretty high price tag on that. And we want to do the funding stack, right? Bernie Sanders has supported this before, and he's supporting this right now, but will we pass the congressional, appropriation committee? We don't know. So I'm asking the committee, what would we, in this particular situation, be eligible for?
So I do believe there are programs where we encourage partnerships between the municipality and the project, correct? I don't know if anybody knows really how to tackle that one or wants to start with it. Jennifer, it looks like you might be willing.
So you're in an interesting situation where you're saying the school owns it, but the municipality wants to buy it. So the way Act 172 works for the up to $500,000 in our program is it's for municipally owned buildings except for schools. So that's the tricky one. But if the municipality is going to buy it and it will technically be owned by the municipality, is it going to be used as a school or is it going to be used as something different?
Well, the proposal that is right now is to have a repurposed building that will provide community services like childcare, adult services, arts and learning center, as well as business rentals. So we have a piece of it that's economic development as well. It's a complex and a large project, but it grew out of a community engagement process. So we're trying to meet the unmet needs of the community.
So it sounds
the school will have access, but it will not have ownership.
Okay, so it sounds to me like it would apply for our program. Then the second piece would be when it becomes owned by the municipality, meaning, we'll have applications open at a certain time, and it would be dependent on whether or not it is owned, or if it is likely to be owned, then it's a conversation we can have on a case-by-case basis about eligibility and when could you be eligible and all those different kinds of things. But it does sound like you could apply for this program.
In addition, a project like that probably would qualify for Northern Borders Regional Commission financing.
For that.
That program is open now, maybe next year that you're talking about something like that. But we have provided funding to people who are trying to purchase property in the past.
And correct me, it seems like there might be we might be in a phase where we're asking folks to sort of put forth some ideas, which still may be premature in their situation, but she could at least go on our website and get connected, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd be happy to talk to you about NBRC financing and the nuts and bolts.
We're trying to, put the strongest application for an implementation grant. We want to upgrade the building to make it energy efficient before being occupied by tenants. So there's these steps that we have to go through. And we've had great support under Josh's department as well. Fantastic people really help us along. We're right now working with Grace Vincent and Nate Cleveland, and so we're moving along. But when we started this process, we were very naive because we're volunteers. And so we really sort of learned about navigating the regulatory landscape, and it's vast. And there's no roadmap. And all these projects are quite different.
What's the expected cost of doing the work you're thinking about?
So the feasibility study, which comes in at a 35% inflationary price tag, is up at 3.1. But there's aspects of it that we see could be addressed by other funding sources so in that funding stack. And we're also hoping that 35% will actually come down.
Right.
So
I ask because virtually every project we see has, as you referred to, a funding stack. It's really difficult to put together funding in Vermont, and most projects have a little here, a little there, and a little there in order to be able to get over the finish line. So it sounds like you're heading in the right direction.
thank you.
The site control question is, clearly you have to own, you can have a long-term lease, something, but the limbo piece, it sounds like MBRC might be unique, that it could be set aside for the eventual new owner.
Right.
A lot of other programs, there has to be a site control, new ownership, or some long-term lease in order for the money to actually go into the project. But
Yeah, so these are the pieces that we're sort of trying to figure out right now, so that we can access funding now. We're hoping to have a vote by the end of August, but we just can't know because the process is what the process is.
Great, we'll move around, maybe some other thoughts will come into play on that. Are there other questions folks might have? Sure.
I'm leading the energy committee and town energy coordinator here in Rochester. We've had the equivalent of a level 1 in our buildings here. The buildings in greatest need, of course, are the high school, the library, our town office, and our town garage. But in the town garage, on blower dirt, it's quite common. We're not going to have a C-750 come. Yeah, it's just, that one seems unnecessary. The office, the libraries actually had at least, I think, two efforts in conjunction with Efficiency Vermont, but actually, when it's right next door, the structure is starting to have some real problems because of water. And we put together a scope of work. We have to do it again. Historic preservation has some other ideas about it. We had to have some discussion between the two of us about building science. But what kind of flexibility is there? I mean, if the auditor came to look at the 3 buildings where a blower door would be more helpful, can they look at that other and just some common sense in that? And then the other question is, are the auditors those who are going through working with Efficiency Vermont, or is there another crew of auditors? Because availability of those folks is very low right now.
So I'll let Jennifer take that.
So our job is to make your job as easy as possible. That's what the goal is. So we have hired 4 different consultants to come in and do these energy assessments. They can do level 1 or level 2s. If you've already had a level 1 done, you're still going to need to do what we call a gap assessment, because there's other things in the bill that need to be assessed that are beyond what a level 1 or a level 2 would do. So no matter what, we got to come back out. And to that end, you can apply for as many municipal buildings within your town as you'd like to. We do ask, or we will be asking for you to prioritize those because they're shared across the state. So we want to know what's your number 1, 2, and so on and so forth. We're going to try to hit as many buildings as we can with the $5 million that was appropriated in the bill. So we're going to keep doing those assessments until the money runs out. So it's just a matter of sort of knocking on the door first and getting in, and then we will work through the RPCs to deploy these consultants. We're doing some other things to make your lives easier too. So ADA is something that's referenced in the bill. We're going ahead and we're putting some consultants on a retainer contract that municipalities can basically work to grab those folks to do ADA assessments as well. And talking about historic preservation, we're already having conversations with historic preservation and ACCD about how to get some of these buildings through really, really quickly in that historic assessment. So we're doing lots of things to make people's lives easier. That's the goal. If we find working through the RPCs that there's other resources that towns would really like to have access to, they just need to let us know at BGS and we'll go ahead and put them under contract. But really, we're trying to make it easy, super easy. So the most important thing is to get with the RPC, and then they're going to walk you through that whole process. But it is really their job once they connect with you to help you complete the applications, and then when we send out the consultant to do the assessments, it's going to be their job to help organize those assessments so they're done efficiently. So if we're coming to Rochester, let's say we're going to do 3 buildings, we want to hit those 3 buildings in the same day, right, to make use of that consultant to the best of our ability, and the RPCs will be helping us schedule and coordinate all of those.
I like easier.
That's what we're trying to do.
So I did not hear this question asked, but I heard you say that schools were excluded from what you can do. So my question would be, if schools needed this done, is there a place for that to happen?
So it is a great question. So any of the retainer contracts that we have in the Office of Purchasing and Contracting, which sits within BGS, those are open to municipalities. So we have lots of different retainer contracts and people can work off of those. The only difference is that you have to pay for it versus Act 172 is paying to have the assessments done in municipally owned buildings except for schools.
Doug, do you know if there's any? Again, I know this hasn't been asked, I'm just curious why schools were, there must have been a reason they were omitted.
Yeah, I was going to highlight for Commissioner Fitch's program that ownership really matters. Like, some libraries are owned by the municipalities, and it has to be a municipally owned building for to qualify for the BGS program. As far as schools go, one reason they weren't included in the Act 172 program is that I know the acronym is ESSER, but there were multiple tranches of funding that were dedicated to schools throughout the pandemic, and they received a very substantial amount of assistance for weatherization and HVAC improvements over the course of the pandemic. So that was why schools were excluded, was because there was, and I think most of those programs have, for the most part, run their course. Some of the work's probably still getting done, but those happened over the last 2 to 3 years pretty constantly. So that's why schools aren't framed.
But it's written into the bill, meaning BGS itself, for example, didn't exclude schools. It was, through the legislative process, that language was put in there.
Right.
In the back.
I have a question about public transportation. I wonder if there's any chance that there could be a reasonable public transportation linking our town to other towns and communities. We don't have a pharmacy. There's no way for people to get their prescription drugs unless they leave this area and go somewhere else. And so I'm wondering what can be done. There used to be a stagecoach that ran at relatively normal hours for people to use, but that has been discontinued and we're quite isolated. So I wonder if any of you have any suggestions.
There is a program, I'm not familiar with all of the details, but there is a program called Connecting Rural Communities that might fit for that. But that's something we can talk about, see if we can identify something that would be helpful for you.
Can I just get your name? I think for purposes of making sure we can get back to you on that one.
Burma, like the country, B-U-R-M-A, Cassidy, C-A-S-S-I-D-Y.
Okay. Either of you got that?
What was the first name?
Burma.
Burma Cassidy. Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on that one that transportation is another one of those areas where in distributing the ARPA funds, spending in transportation was explicitly prohibited at the time that ARPA passed, and so the legislature worked with the governor over 2 years. They didn't make a policy decision not to spend any of that $1 billion on transportation. It was prohibited. After all of that money had been appropriated, like in the most recent federal vehicle, they actually allowed states to spend up to 30% on transportation, but all of that money has already been planned out in these different programs. So I think it's possible that we could see things change with some transportation spending getting pulled into scope for ARPA over the next 1.5 years as programs run and we see if everyone's going to spend all their money or not. But I just wanted to highlight that the main reason we're not talking about a lot of transportation programs today, it's not a choice that we made in Vermont. It was a federal aspect of the law.
Just wanted to clarify, isn't Tri-Valley Transit the service provider for this area that replaced Stagecoach? And it just doesn't run frequently enough, because I know it goes all the way from Middlebury to Thetford. It's over 3 valleys.
Once COVID hit, it just pretty much shut down. And now
Because my home phone number was the previous one. It gets confused with the old Stagecoach number in Randolph, so literally every Tri-Valley.
Go ahead, Ray.
I think I can talk to that. I mean, I'm a volunteer driver, but I only do it half a day on Tuesdays. And I know working with Tri-Valley Transit, they're always like everybody else in the states looking for people. So if you don't have the people to volunteer, you're not going to get the transit that you need. So, yes, that's the concern, is that you just don't, there's a need that's out there, but there's the underlying need too of getting people to do things like that, either as a paid Tri-Valley Transit driver or as a volunteer to do what you can for your own community. Yes.
In listening to the discussion about the energy work and the consultants, I think that's something we touched on earlier in Springfield and everywhere, like the capacity. Whether it's at the federal government moving all this money and then they're not getting back quick enough because they're under-resourced and staff, the state all of our partners at their regional organizations and nonprofits, and then all the businesses trying to respond to all this money. I mean, just in our department budget alone, it's up 300% since before the pandemic. So if we weren't sized to deal with this level of influx of money and all the resulting work that's happening before, it's just, that's reality. Everyone is overstretched, and there isn't enough people to do and to respond, and everyone's just making the best of it that they can. And, you know, maybe we'll catch up at some point, or maybe it'll stretch on, and as Doug said, help mitigate the sort of possible economic downturn, because we have these resources that are going to continue to be spent in our communities for the next 5 years, which will help in some ways if there is some sort of downturn, because projects are still happening.
And likewise, if we're going to meet our state goals for energy and greenhouse gas emissions, we've got to have more workforce there, more training and development in those specific areas.
Yep.
Absolutely. Other questions? I see a hand over here.
So my name is Lolly. I'm recently new director for Park House, which is affordable co-housing for seniors and other adults. 100-year-old building across the corner. I guess I'm wondering, so I think about, for one, our building is old. We did have some recent remodeling, but there are some other energy efficiency things we'd like to do, replacing boiler, some ADA accessibility types of things we'd like to do. And then aside from the building, I'd love to figure out a way to help make it more affordable, because I think as the population ages with the inflation right now and sort of a stagnantness on retirement incomes and benefits and things like that, we struggle to sort of make ends meet in our own budget in order to keep it affordable for them. Where do I begin? Which problems or which pot should I aim for first? Do I try and I don't know if that's even a question for you guys, but hearing about some of the housing initiatives, I'm not even sure if we are a nonprofit, but do we qualify? We're not a municipality. There's been some programs I looked at that were geared towards affordable housing and whatnot, but they were more, homeowner specific programs. Some things I've tried to look into for our residents that I'd have to apply for every single one of them myself in order to help them do that. But we have 15 people living in our building that I'd just like to help.
Yeah, so clearly the affordable housing programs, I do know that there was an investment probably 5 or 6 years ago into the Park House to try to address some of those things. That the main funder in this world and your program would be Vermont Housing Conservation Board, VHCB. There possibly some other through the town, through the CDBG program. I think there was an assessment of the needs. It kicked off that work that was done about 4 or 5, 6 years ago. Yes. And so be digging that back, continuing to follow up. I know the challenges of trying to keep things affordable, but yet make repairs, and how you're paying for all that is tricky. And there's lots of senior living facilities that are in a similar boat across the state that are in need of significant investments, and you can't really charge more for the services to make those, so you're going to need to rely on these programs to do that. I know the town, I'm pretty sure still votes to support tax abatement or whatever it is, and so I'm happy to come and talk to us and give you the name. That's your best source, but you're going to need to talk to them, and you're going to talk to them often, and you're going to need to also include your reps, your legislative reps from this region to echo your need to support that application, because there's lots of applications and lots of demand for those same resources, but happy to chat with you after.
And a follow-up, just because you made me think of it as well. Obviously, I think it's a nationwide thing, but all of our population is aging, and more people are looking for these alternative types of places to live. I think ours is relatively unique in the way that it's set up, but if we wanted to expand, if it was possible for us to do that, I think we could fill a new place up like really quickly. We have a relatively extensive waiting list and have had one for a couple of years. So the thoughts have been, the wishes and the dreams have been floated about, what if we could add another building or, add on to our building some way to increase our capacity. Does something like that fall under?
Yeah, I'd add another acronym there, finance agency. They would look into some big federal low-income housing tax credits, and there's a small carve-out for senior and independent living. It still is very competitive, but let's chat afterwards and start that conversation.
And not just us, we all do, but we've got a little one-page up here that captures some of these programs, business cards, so we need to get hold of us.
Oh, over here.
Yeah, hi, Larry Dozen. I'm the Emergency Management Director for Rochester. So as EMD, one concern that I have is that the valley currently does not have an ambulance in our valley. They have to come over a mountain range to get here. And what keeps me up at night, one of the things is we could lose neighbors because of that way. Can you folks comment on availability of funds for creation of a ambulance building to house an ambulance and a sleeping facility? Are funds available for it? Is this something that a municipality would attempt to work with, or would it go right through the local ambulance?
You sound some public safety here.
Yeah.
That's a first, Larry, for, I think,
infrastructure.
yeah, I mean, the emergency services around the state, I think you maybe heard a lot of the articles that, you put that in that boat, emergency services, some of the fire departments, some of the sheriffs. I mean, there's a regional sort of shortage of capacity that's going on. I would argue in some of our rural communities that maybe new approaches or new approaches to how we're addressing these needs that many of the small communities have are probably going
so it would have to be a novel approach. For example, if we were to one day create a new town office, perhaps on this former school, if that were to happen, and perhaps redevelop our current offices for affordable housing, which is a good location for it. We could potentially build in an ambulance or other municipal service garage with that?
I mean, I think, again, it's an infrastructure, change that potentially could qualify. The fact that it hasn't, sort of the project itself hasn't been, it's not that far out of the gate, so to speak, could be challenging in terms of even getting in under the wire, so to speak. That could be the challenge. That being said, I don't think any of us are here to say like it's completely off the table. Erica, it looks like you might have a thought on this.
Have you spoken to anyone over in Sharon or Royalton? Because they are going through a similar situation. They have a rescue service and are trying to kind of replace where it's located for better accessibility to their service area. And so I think in touch with those folks, they might have some ideas.
I've been in touch with Matt Parrish over in Bethel.
Okay.
And they're our provider here. But they're covering 7 towns.
Yeah.
If they're in Barnard, somebody here has a heart attack, it can get tough. There's 2 wagons on a lot of.
I was going to say, Larry, I'll connect with you if you want. I can connect you with the Department of Health and Public Safety. You may potentially have some avenues. I know a lot of these programs on the federal funding side, especially, are a lot focused on the infrastructure pieces.
Well, that's what our situation. We need to create the.
I mean, specifically like the other public works infrastructure, but there may be some other avenues, especially federal funding for more safety stuff. We really Building Safe Communities Act and some other things. So basically, we'll be some other options there.
That would be great. With that, I think, just want to be respectful of folks' time, so we're at time, but I think, some of us probably need to run out. There's a few that may linger for a few minutes. I will give you one last question.
One last question?
One last question, absolutely.
Earlier on, you asked what are you doing the next time on the select board in Rochester? You asked, we're hoping to identify what are some of the barriers that are leading to the problems, and this is specific to housing. I'm curious if there's any thought about Airbnbs and how they've impacted the availability of housing in rural communities like this, where it's scenic. People like to come here and visit, and you can't find a house to rent or buy because they're being bought up and pressed into services, short-term rentals.
Yeah, short-term rentals, we can spend a whole day talking about that. I mean, there's statewide data and then there's regional data, and not every community is experiencing the same challenges. Not every community has the same feeling about short-term rentals. Some are welcoming with open arms. Some are saying it's causing a real problem for their community members. So there clearly is a change, but what's interesting is Vermont has had second homes for 100 years ago. We've been the second highest rate of second homeowners in the nation, only behind Maine. New Hampshire's third. So there's always been vacation homes that have largely been, vacant or used seasonally. And short-term rentals with the online platforms have sort of flipped the switch on a little bit and have allowed people to either be owners of those properties easier than they were in the past because they can cover their bills. Allow people that have second homes to use them for part of the time. So what we're seeing statewide, I don't know Rochester's data, but about 3% of the housing stock is used as short-term rentals. About half of that is within what are already vacation homes, and 17% of Vermont's housing stock is second homes. So short-term rentals are a much smaller problem than second homes if you're looking at homes out of the housing stock, but yet it can have an effect on a community. I'd say the other part of this challenge is short-term rentals are often now used for extended work stays. People are using them for other than just vacation. Sometimes they're serving as a traveling nurse or someone that's actually working in your community because they can't find something else. So then that's an added challenge. And then I think another one of our problems is we are a heavily visited state. Tourism is the second biggest industry. Are we building enough actual vacation lodging properties to keep up with the demand? If we aren't, it's being met somewhere else. Even in the capital city where we have lots of legislators and lobbyists and folks that come, there was a new hotel that was defeated in downtown Montpelier. Folks didn't want to see the parking garage associated with it. It was defeated. Well, the short-term rentals in Montpelier have just grown. It's because no one has taken up that demand other than the folks that already own housing there, because it's not going away. And so I think it's a multi-part challenge. And we've also used a lot of the lodging properties to serve emergency housing over the last couple of years. Thousands of units out of what was part of the traveling space available is also shifted to be emergency housing. So there's so many things feeding into this that it can absolutely be a huge problem in some towns and not a problem at all in others.
Yeah, it's showed us that lodging properties really are part of our housing stock, and that, short-term rentals has, I think, highlighted that more, made it more clear to us, but I think that just means we have to take that into account when we're thinking about, do we have enough housing stock? That's also part of it, and what do we have to do now to meet the needs for that whole spectrum of all those types of housing?
Especially to bring in the demographic that we need. Younger working families. That's what's going to sustain this state, and they can't afford to live here. They just don't have housing available.
Right. The other component that we see in our department is what's happening is hotels, etc., are being used as workforce housing. So ski areas, places like that are purchasing hotels, taking them off the market, creating more Airbnb demand because they don't have enough workforce housing.
And someone that lives in a community like this that maybe is struggling to pay their bills, they might convert part of their place to be an Airbnb to pay their bills. So it's hard to paint one pin one problem when there's so many other pieces. Sometimes it's a solution as much as it's a
There's a
problem.
difference between someone who lives in communities, invested in the community. Most of our government's a volunteer, town governments, and someone who just purchases a building or multiple buildings just for Airbnb. That's a whole different reality. I read a recent article on that. I understand the percentages are kind of indefinite, but still, some towns like Woodstock have actually created policies, and I assume that that is, something that towns can do if they're particularly threatened by this phenomenon, and they can't get their teachers in, and they can't get their healthcare workers a place to live.
Towns are able to, yeah.
So a town can make their own policy.
Burlington. There's a lot to have, but you have to understand your own data because you could have
You absolutely do.
an opposite impact of what you thought you were going to solve.
Yeah.
It takes research.
I know we said one more, but go ahead, I feel bad. I want to let you speak.
It's a quick practical question. My wife and I own a small farm in town. We raise blueberries and raspberries. We've had it for 16 years. We thought we'd be living on it by now, but it's a farm. So we're still trying to get enough money for that. But my ears pricked up a little bit relative to housing. If we could build on the farm, we'd free up a house in town. I've tried going for working lands grants, but there's been matching funds that have been daunting and other things. Is there some way that this group could help clear the way so that we find maybe some money could come from housing, maybe some could come from working lands? But if I get rebuffed by working lands, then I'm going to go back. Is there a way to coordinate trying to make something work out?
I know. There might be a little bit of hope. There is an application currently before Working Lands that deals with farm worker housing, which would be a shift. Dollars have not been able to be used for that in the past. So that's being evaluated. And there's also another project, and it's statewide, what you're talking about, because there are 3 or 4 farms in Chittenden County, and they need housing for their workers, which housing in Chittenden County it's expensive everywhere, but it's really prohibitive for that. So there's some work being done, and so that you call it the missing middle, that's what we're calling it, the missing middle, where it needs to be addressed. So there's a little, I'm happy to follow up on you, but I think we're trying to make some progress with that because people that work on these farms, the farm, you've got to be there more than 8 hours a day. So they're having to commute long distances to work on those, which is creating all sorts of issues. But happy to follow up with you on that.
It's particularly challenging because a lot of the public money that we invest in housing, it's supposed to be for housing that's available to the public. And so when you provide it to one owner, it's sort of, it's not publicly available. And then you have that added challenge of often much farmland is conserved, conservation easement, or you've sold your development rights. So then, therefore, you're not able to access the same mortgage, sort of to be in first position to then build a home on the farm if you've got some of it enrolled in that conservation easement. So there's a lot of work on this that is playing out right now with a few test cases that Anson was talking about. And I think there'll be even more opportunities down the road here, but happy to talk to you more about it.
Great, thank you.
I just want to respond that one of the areas that our CRP financing can be used for is to support agriculture. We have had a couple of applications that are situations similar to yours. I don't want to offer too much hope. One of the problems with our program is it only provides 20% of the financing that's required to do something. And, as I think I mentioned earlier, we're looking to be the last money to get a project going. So I'm expecting our funds will be used quite in the near future.
Thank you all for being here today. As I mentioned, some of us will try to linger for a few minutes, but again, if you need us, either reach out to Erica, reach out to one of us directly. If you look at any of our websites, you should be able to find us pretty easily. Erica, do you have any last words?